Hello and welcome, animation fans, to another iAnimate podcast. I'm your host, Larry Vasquez, and joining me once again is the one, the only, Rick Arroyo. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing pretty good, Noah. Thanks for that intro. That's pretty awesome.
Got it, man. I noticed that on the last couple podcasts, I've not said your last name, and I want people to get your last name because you're one of our instructors here, and maybe they can take you for the games class here.
Yeah.
We've got a great guest tonight here, Brett Pascal, who's also one of our instructors, who's currently working over EA. His title, Rick?
He's Technical Animation Director at EA. I mean, he has a great role. He's working on the Frostbite engine, so it's pretty awesome, I gotta say.
Cool. We'll have to talk with him about that. And also, just a big thank you to all of our past guests. We've been doing this just over a year now, and I'm getting ready to wrap up another year here, and it's been really cool having all these great guests. So big thank you to our past guests, and thank you to those who listen to us. I mean, this is why we do it, so big thank you.
Yeah, thanks, and Happy New Year's to everyone.
Yeah, this will be our last podcast for 2013, so we'll go out with a bang here. All right, well, let's pull him on. First off, Brett, thank you very much for joining us. We know that our guests have a life, families, friends, and so we always really do appreciate you guys taking some time out to join us.
No, it's great, man. Thanks for having me on.
Okay, my candid first question here, because I'm always curious about the person behind the animation here. How'd you get into animation?
Mine's kind of a weird bit of a longer story. I was always somebody who drew a lot as a kid, watched tons and tons of cartoons. So I would say if there was a seed planted, it was definitely, like the Chuck Jones and the Looney Tunes stuff that I used to watch so much. But in school, I never really kind of took a beeline towards art or towards animation or anything like that. I kind of finished school, didn't really have a plan, took a whole bunch of different jobs, doing a whole bunch of different things, from like driving power jacks and stocking shelves and waiting tables and renting cars and then selling cars. And it was like one of those days where I'm working and it's real boring. Nobody's coming into the dealership. And I got a call from my mom, actually, who had found an article about a school that was teaching animation. She's like, hey, you draw all the time, just one of those type of things, like you draw all the time, you should look into it, right? And I was looking around at that point. I started looking at a whole bunch of different schools, and got a bunch of rejection letters, and then finally this one came along and they took me in. So
what school was that?
It was called Applied Multimedia. They had like a foundation course, and then at the time they were just like, it was like their first run of like a 3D animation dedicated course. So
how far did that get you in your animation career? Enough to get a job, or is that something you still had to practice afterwards, or how did that work?
Yeah, no, it didn't really get me too far at all, because it was like ramping up on more in-depth computer use, aside from just like basically turning one on, and not really, not a real super technical background in computers, right? So there was a lot of learning, and there were some really cool people that I was lucky enough to be in class with, who were supportive, sharing, and the kind of people who helped me kind of get along to a point where I got it, at least enough of that hunger. I mean, it was so clear, right? I mean, from having all these little, like, the good thing about having all these like different jobs was that it was painfully clear that there really wasn't anything else as interesting that was possible. And for me, it was like, well, that was the thing I started chasing. So after that, yeah, lots of practice. One, buddy of mine from class there, he was kind of a really good line for me, because he found a couple of other things. When we finished that class, that was when Maya 1 launched.
Oh, wow.
So it was ill-timed, right? Like we're working on Power Animator 8.5 and trying to cram these demo reels together, and it's like, oh, this little piece of software called Maya is coming along, and it was like, oh, like we just would have been a great time to start, but yeah, we managed to get into a Maya class together after that. So just kind of, it was a few stepping stones after that before anything really happened.
So what was your first gigs?
So my first gig, I got a TA gig. So I basically finished that class, kind of moved out to BC here, Vancouver, to take this class in Maya. And then when that was done, I was trying to figure out what I was going to do next. And it just so happened that the same school I went to was looking for a TA. So I ended up hopping back to Calgary, which is where I started in, taking that TA job. But like an animation job, there was a studio in Vancouver. I moved back to go on EI, and while I was on EI, a studio started, and they were trying to make a TV pilot, and EI being employment insurance for those not in Canada. And yeah, they took me on, but they took me on because I offered to work for free. So it was pretty easy, right?
You promised to work for experience, huh?
More or less, yeah. At that point, I was like, yeah, I'm gonna need something here because EI is kind of drawing to a close, and we need to catch on at some point here.
Hmm.
So
So,
yeah.
so your first gig was as a teacher's assistant, which is kind of interesting for those that don't know. Brett actually teaches here at iAnimate our Games Workshop 3. So even right out the gates, you were already doing teaching, huh?
Yeah, it was funny because it was super beneficial at the time. It was just like I had a pretty much 24/7 line into I mean, because back then it was like O2 machines and the software was crazy expensive. The machines were ridiculously expensive. So the access alone was worth taking the job.
Mm.
But getting in there, for me, the cool thing was I could show a few people some of the things that I had picked up because most of these people, especially in Calgary, just had no idea. Like they might have been computer literate in, more so than me, but when it came down to the software, I was able to help a little bit, offer ways around some of the problems they were hitting, and just made good connections with those people, which was huge. Like I'm a huge believer in that like relationship that you have with everybody that you encounter. So in that sense, it was great.
Mm. I had to watch I checked out your bio, of course, before the podcast here, and as well as checked out your demo reel. And I gotta say, we've had a podcast with Cameron Fielding where you're familiar with him, right?
I certainly am. Yeah.
But your Turok animation, man, I got to tell you, that is some killer work.
Thanks, man. Yeah, that punched my ticket, really. I mean, to that point, everything was just like trying to get over an edge, try to get over an edge, and like pushing super hard. And I remember when we saw Cam's reel, it was like, dude, this guy's incredible. Like, I couldn't believe I was in the position to hire, like to, not make the final hiring decision, but like, be in a room where we're like, should we hire Cam? I think we should. Yeah. And like, after he got in there, man, like I remember so clearly we used to do a dailies thing. We had like this web-based dailies, which was super cool, where every day you could submit like an AVI or an image or whatever it is of the stuff that you had been working on that day. And so obviously for animators, we'd always kick in our play bless, and the next morning we would meet for dailies, and we would just pull all these videos up from the web daily system. And I remember seeing his first video. I was like, holy cow, like what did he do? He must have done something. Like he had this tail moving in a way. I'm like, there's no way he had time to do that yesterday. Turns out he's also a scripter. So it was like, holy cow. Yeah, his mail skills were sharp. So I mean, we sat in the same pod, like the same room, and I just tried to take advantage of every bit of feedback that Cam could give me. And clearly on those sequences, there's a lot of that in there.
Ah, nice. Yeah, it was just you got some killer work on that. And then one of the things I mentioned about his work that I got to mention about yours is just it felt very aggressive and natural in that response. So that's why I just really enjoyed watching it here. We got to talk with him a little bit on how he approaches some of the creature animation. Can you give a little bit of an insight on your kind of workflow and how you address some of the creature stuff?
Yeah, for sure. First, thanks, because yeah, that was like the best time in terms of just raw animation in my career. And yeah, when we used to do that stuff, I mean, really, the biggest thing was reference. Like by far, the amount of time we logged and the support we got too from the studio was pretty incredible at the time. I mean, padding, dummies, prop weapons, cameras, like whatever we needed to establish ourselves a sort of. It wasn't really like a room for video reference, but we had tons of places we could do it, tons of resources to do it, and we just shot tons and tons and tons of stuff. So for me, that was really the big thing, was like, and something that Cam, I think, really helped a lot for me, was to be able to analyze that reference and bring it back to something that you can use without it having to be totally literal, right? Like without rotoing it, like, but just trying to catch like the essence of the main poses that you needed in there. And for me, when I would get, pretty happy with a set of reference, sometimes it would be some sketches, some really like scratchy kind of thumbnails and a few good clips that had some really key places where there was really good interaction or intensity. And then, going in the package, jumping into Maya, it would be just like bang out all those keys on fives or whatever. And then, kind of get that whole creative process out before you start looking at timing and all that kind of stuff. I can't, for the life of me, I can't remember which animator it was, but he was talking about how even in 2D, like he would just scribble all the key poses, like, and not really worry about keeping on model and not really worrying about anything that was like technical at all. I thought that was cool, and I thought that was something that is super applicable to 3 to CG as well, right?
That's how Jason, from his demos, obviously uses video reference, but one of the things that he first jumps into is sketching it out in 2D. And he feels like I can just get that creative juices flowing there first. I don't have to worry about keeping on model or anything, just getting the ideas out there.
Yeah, I think that's powerful, right? Because you get all that stuff. It's like when you have like, if there's like a topic that you just feel so strongly about, and you could like run off points, supporting some particular viewpoint or something you're thinking about, and it's like, if you had to stop for 5 minutes after each thing you said, like you'd maybe forget some of those things or something. I don't know. It felt maybe it's like a flow of information that kind of needs to be let go. And yeah, totally, I get that. That makes a lot of sense.
So now you have the interaction with the creatures and the humans here. So obviously you're able to do a lot of video for the humans, but what did you do for the creatures?
Yeah, for creatures, I mean, sometimes I know it's like kind of cliche or whatever, but we would sometimes act it out. Like there was a couple of T-Rex moves where I would just kind of act like a T-Rex, record some footage, and then like time scale it or something, just to try to give it a feel like that maybe was better for a creature of such mass or whatever. But that was mostly sketches, and sketches that were rough. I've always like been a real big fan of super sketchy, rough art, like not finished rendered work. And so for me, it was really easy to draw like kind of a fluid line of action and just kind of build off of that thing and just kind of shape it out.
And then what about with the interaction? How do you address, for lack of a better term, two character interaction with the human and the creature? Do you pose out one full, blocked it out one, and then play it off for the second one, or do you kind of work them together, or how does that work for your workflow?
Yeah, that's sort of evolved a bit. I think that's where, because now I find myself using a lot more of a straight ahead kind of approach to doing stuff. And I think that's where it came from. Because when I first started trying to animate both together, my director was always like, "No, there's no tension. There's no tension. You got to fix, there's not enough tension. It's not going to work." Like, and just pushing the idea that like, so from like a high level perspective was like pushing each pose till it seemed like if the other character wasn't there, the guy would just fall or the creature would fall. Like, there's such a commitment to the action that like there's no thought about like, oh, am I balanced? It's like, no, I'm trying to take you down. I'm trying to hold you off as best I can, or kill you myself in this case. And whenever you're in a position like that, the last thing you're thinking about is anything other than just like the immediate win or lose situation. So that was what fueled the poses. But then the way I would kind of break it out was like, well, who's leading the action at this moment, right? So if it's like the creature leaping at the player or whatever character, then I would start by laying out their poses and try to make the poses for the secondary character in reaction to that, so that even in blocking they weren't hitting poses at the same time, because I found it really hard to tell whether or not it was working that way. And I would find that sometimes I would pose out both of them together. When I went back to adjust the timing, I had sort of lost the essence of the pose because I was just moving things rather than actually like posing them based on something that they can't predict, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
I mean, like, so it might shift, right? So the creature might attack him, but then he starts getting back. And then he starts, the player starts to lead the action a little bit. It was just the idea that like that old thing of like key the whole character and then like drag the arm a couple frames later and drag the a leg a couple frames later and offset the hips by a few frames. Like, it might make the motion feel less blocky, but it ruins the essence of the pose. So
I want to really quickly say something. Like, when I do the two character interaction, I call it a driver and driven. One character is driving the scene and the other one's being driven. And I find it, instead of looking at a whole scene, I look at moments. At one moment, the main character is driving character B. And then when I'm keen and, maybe he reacts to something and then the table turns, then character B might be the driver. So I go back and forth with keying those moments. I don't necessarily like look for the key poses. I'm keying moments in the scene. I key on ones. Most of the time I key on ones. You could key on fives. Doesn't really matter. I just like to focus on the moments and that picture. Is that how you kind of see it as well when you say like, you're trying to, get the essence?
Exactly. Like you're saying, yeah, pretty much exactly what I feel as well. I agree with that. Like, and the biggest problem is when you don't do it, like when that driver driven relationship, like the contacts are wrong. Like, when a guy gets punched, like if you just simplify it down to like a basic action, like a punch, like when that punch lands on the jaw starts moving, then the head starts moving, and everything reacts like in sequence after that initial blow. And the worst thing that can happen is to ruin the impact of a strike or an attack is to have reaction before the action. You know what I mean? So that's why I think it's so, like, if you're going to animate that punch like it's being thrown with like everything the guy's got. You go back, you find the place where that connection is going to be, you pose that second character, and then you adjust that hand to meet it so that that head does not move at all until the punch lands. And then the tightness of impact is so legible. But it's exactly that. It's like you're not thinking about, when you start separating it into the leader and the follower, the driver and the driven, you start to get an essence of an action, and the poses become secondary to that, rather than, hey, look, this pose looks kind of great, now I'll drag it apart or whatever, right? Yeah.
Making it feel more organic rather than just planned out. Yeah,
that's really the key to it. I mean, otherwise, you don't get the tension and the lack of balance, which is so key to those moments.
I'm going to transition a little bit here to Pixel Challenge. You spoke at that one here a little bit ago, and I was able to kind of show some of your Turok stuff, but more for the camera work. How'd you get picked for that lecture or that masterclass?
Well, cameras are something, like, I get super passionate about cameras because it seems like every animator starts, and I'm no different, right? Where they're going to do a dialogue sequence, so they put a camera where you see all three characters talking, and it's really not entertaining, and it's also hard to animate to, and there's no subtlety, and there's just a lack of overall entertainment value. And so one of the guys that I'd worked with, my director at Propaganda when I came in, was this guy by the name of Mike Ferraro, and he was the guy that really started me down the road of like trying to understand what a camera is. And he was such a no nonsense type of dude. He was just like how does a real camera work? It's like, oh yeah, good point. And I find that with most animators, they don't maybe necessarily understand how a real camera works. So when the opportunity came to do a talk there, me and Rick were talking about it, and they were kind enough to extend an invitation to bring something to that table, and I said, I think if you guys are agreeable to it, I think cameras is something that is not only interesting, but something that I started out horrible at and kind of grew at, and that I think there's a really cool message in any sort of topic or tip or trick or way of doing things that comes from somebody who's gone through a pretty steep learning curve of their own. And that's why I thought it would be really an interesting topic.
Yeah, it was a great lecture. I really thought it was neat, and some of the tips and tricks you had in there.
Thanks, man. Yeah, there's so many cool things that I've learned from people throughout the way. Once we started to get into more cinematics and not just gameplay stuff, and it really did start with some of that creature stuff, ironically, because we had to stage that in an interesting way. And I just think it's so important. Like, it's not only important because of the overall entertainment value, but if you're smart with your cameras and you shoot something in a way that's entertaining, you actually save yourself a lot of animating time, which I think is always good, right? I mean, especially when you're dealing with large scale cinematics, like when you can find places to save time and focus quality on a smaller portion of the larger picture, I think that's huge. Yeah.
Even on small stuff, on like small events, small animations, small takedowns, the camera could be a key to help get your animation done on time, or even sell that moment, that action, even better. So camera's not just for cinematics,
Okay, well, here's my question then. How much, as an animator, particularly for games, do you have control with the camera? Is it just in cinematics, or do you actually have it in game as well? Since the player is also somewhat controlling the camera, or does it depend upon what game type you're using?
I think you're right. Yeah, I think it does depend on the genre and specifically the title itself that you're using, working on. But I mean, yeah, obviously in cinematics, it's so key and it's so important. And then in gameplay, there are times, and there's like in-game cinematics. There's moments that you want to sell, reveals, things that you can do with the camera to guide a player. And on top of that, even if you don't necessarily have direct control of the camera in the given sequence, you have a pretty good understanding based on what game you're working on of how that camera impacts the camera in the game is going to impact what you see from the gameplay perspective. So for an example, like recently, one of my last projects before coming back to where I am now was the Company of Heroes 2 game, and that being an RTS, you don't have a lot of control over the camera, but you understand where the camera is. So we had really great tools in the art package to put the camera at the point where we would see it from game. And there's so much legibility that you have to concentrate on because you don't have control of the camera. It changes the way you animate the gameplay stuff itself. So even when you're not controlling it, being mindful of it is massive.
What's an RTS?
Real-time strategy. So you're generally a lot higher up. You're commanding squads rather than individuals. And the character space on screen is a lot smaller. You've got vehicles and you've got heavy weapons and you've got all these different elements and all these, squads of characters that you're controlling. And what's legible, close up or from a third person camera is not legible at an RTS camera level. So there's a lot of things you have to consider and challenges that it presents. So,
how do you animate differently for a game like that? Do you like for theater, for example, they would exaggerate motions because their audience would be much further versus television or film where the camera can get right up there. Do you exaggerate moves so that it's more legible, or how does that work for you?
Yeah, exactly. But you can't. I mean, it's picking spots. Like, you really want to, like, if we're honest, like in games, for the most part, save for sports games and stuff like this, really your big hook is a victory, which is usually you taking out another player with some sort of weapon or hand-to-hand combat. So the best payoff is always the attack and the response to the attack. So for something like an RTS, you might spend a lot more and really dramatize a weapon firing, or you might pick something with a lot of moving components. Like there were certain weapons in those games where there was a lot of moving parts. Like you've got a loader who's loading giant shells into this weapon, and you've got like 6 or 7 moving components on the barrel or on the base of that gun. And so that's where the guy opening the firing door or pulling the latch that pushes back the mechanism to load the shell, like you would really hype up that animation. And then deaths were really, when I first started playing the game, when I got there, I was like, I can't tell when the guys are dying. We need to make sure like when they're hurt, we know they're still moving, but they look like they're hurt. And when they're dead, they're dead, so that we don't waste resources. Because in a real-time strategy game, resources are so important. So, it really is so important to be a game developer first in those situations, right?
Yeah, I've heard Rick preach that one. Game developer.
Yeah. I mean, but you still like in games, it's like we deal with a lot of cameras. It's not like we just deal with the character animation it gets in game. We animate either to camera, like for if we mimic the camera so we can see how it would look in game before we put it in game, or we put it straight into game and see how it looks with the camera. And there's times that we literally animate the camera and we export that into the engine. So game animators, like any other animators, still needs to learn about cameras and learn how it affects the player as much as it affects the audience. So, we deal with cameras, but just in more different ways than most animators would.
Now, do you talk about that in your class, Brett?
Yeah, I think, definitely. Like that's something we cover that quite a bit, and actually have evolved that camera lecture quite a bit because there's just so many interesting things to bring up with it. It's really like the relationship reverses, right? Like you use the camera to stage your action, and then in some moves you're actually staging the action to match the camera, and so it's just kind of a flip on that relationship, basically. But yeah, we talk about it a lot. One of the things that I've gotten into a lot recently, just I have so much fun kind of messing around with cameras, is like taking old moves and reshooting them to get a different feel out of them is super awesome. So I've been doing a lot of that in the class. Like we'll take, I took a couple of my old Turok moves and we kind of load them up. One thing I love in the iAnimate classroom is like just kicking in some Maya and just kind of working right in package while we're in class. Like that's
cool.
a lot of fun. Like doing the instructor kind of demos. So there was one this last workshop we load up one of my it's like a prototype animation that never made the second game, where the player jumps out of a tree and like attacks this four-legged sort of dino creature from above. And that move is on my reel, but I reshot it and made it just feel like 100 times more intense, just like in the class, like within that hour space. It's tons of fun. So
that's awesome.
Before you get to the next question, because I watch some of Brent's stuff, it's really cool that maybe Brent, I'm sorry, Brett. I keep saying Brent because I was with
there are
him.
Brents and Bretts in our organization.
This is bad. This is bad. But Brett, maybe you don't notice, but it's like he integrates his camera work in his workflow. It's like his like when I animate, like takedowns, I say it's depending on the animation, I animate the camera with my work. It's part of my workflow, and I noticed that it's like it's almost seamless. It's like when I watch his videos, it's like he's doing it. He's putting cameras in, he's talking about it, and he's doing his animation, but without realizing he's always like 2 steps ahead what he wants to do with his camera. And I think that's really cool to see his workflow and how he's able to show that to students and share that method of animating. So I just want to say that was pretty cool.
Yeah, thanks, man. Yes, it's fun. It's like, and when I go through that stuff, sometimes you just make discoveries while you go too, which is really cool. Like that's what I love about it. It's almost like, what's funny is like I even started, this might sound really crazy, but like I sometimes run like a Camtasia or like some kind of screen casting software while I'm working. I actually find it like almost therapeutic to almost talk to myself while I'm doing it. It's like this weird thing that happened after I started doing these lectures. I think you find things when you're doing it that way. Like the last couple times I was doing these camera things, I realized like, I actually can, I don't recommend people animate by animating the camera from the viewport, like because you get all kinds of these really weird translations and the camera moves just look really unnatural. But there's nothing that says you can't start by blocking it in that way and then replace that with a camera that's animated in a more proper sense. So I've started finding little workflows myself that I may have not used before that I'm now using more often. So yeah, it's great. It's like discovery.
And that was one of the things I noticed from that Pixel lecture that you did, was just talking about the camera and it being natural. It wasn't just something that, I forget exactly what it was, but you're like, a normal camera wouldn't do this, And I think oftentimes because of the computer, we don't take some of that stuff in consideration when it's dealing with a camera too.
Yeah, I think that's the big problem. You come in when you don't really have a base or a firm understanding. Like you understand a camera has a lens and it has a couple of parts that obviously work, but when you come in there and you have this like open, 3 axes of space you can just go bananas in. It's sometimes hard to hold back a little bit, right? And it's like, but you have to, because it's that, it's when people look at things and they're like, well, that has like a cinematic or like a filmic quality to it. It's because in movies, they're mostly shot with the same 10 lenses, like, or 9 or 10 lenses, like over and over and over again. So, certain lenses lend themselves well to certain shots. And so the reason you think something looks cinematic is not just because it has like a grain on the film or like, it's shot in a certain ratio or resolution. It's really about how that lens looks. And even if you don't know cameras, you can pick it out because your eye is just used to, if you've watched any number of movies, you're seeing that relationship all the way through, right? So,
yeah. Good point.
Yeah.
All right. So what are you working on now, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, no. So I got this really great opportunity that came up. I'm back at Electronic Arts Canada in Burnaby, and I'm working on the Frostbite engine. it's a super cool kind of like lab job in a sense. Like we are working on the game engine, and for me as an animator, I'm working on building like example content, uh, building workflows, building tools and pipelines that make everybody who develops for Frostbite have a better relationship with the tools that they work with. Um, what's so cool about it is just the games that are like it's like the Battlefields, Need for Speed is on that. Um, there's there's a lot of games that will be coming out on it. It's like a really amazing piece of tech, and it produces super high quality, top notch games, and it's a chance for me to get a little bit more technical, which is something I didn't realize, but I kind of was looking for a little bit.
Some of those workflows are those workflows are what you're teaching as well to the students, or you're using in your demos, or
Yeah, I mean, I'm obviously short of the actual tools themselves. There's a lot of things that are just the same stuff that I practice when I'm animating that goes into consideration of creating those tools. Like it's not like it's. I've been in a position with the last several jobs where it's like, look, these are the tools we've got, and some of them are good and some of them may not be, but we have a project to deliver on. So whatever works to get this thing in is what we need to do, and wherever we could, we would try to like. If we developed something that was new, we would try to make sure that it got integrated into a tool set. But a lot of times it was just like, we need to get this cinematic done. What can we do with this camera here? And kind of where I'm at now is like based on the kind of workflows and situations that I am in when I'm animating, like what's the optimal way to do this thing? Like not like let's just solve it for this particular project, but like can we find ways to solve these problems that like propagate through teams and live on and get built upon rather than just solve a problem stopgap, which is a cool opportunity.
Yeah, we actually had our last podcast with Simon Unger, and he was mentioning that the kind of that same difference where he's had projects where he's kind of got in maybe halfway through, and he's having to accommodate based upon what they have. Whereas now the company he's working for, he's hitting it more from the ground up, and he's able to solve a lot of those issues that he knows are going to be problems later on. And so that kind of sounds like that's what you're able to do here a little bit with this Frostbite engine, is taking a lot of what you accumulated over the years on troubleshooting, and now kind of building an engine to kind of help solve some of those issues. Is that right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and they have a lot of great tech already there. So a lot of it is like just harnessing good tech and making it usable, I guess, is more like it, right? Like from an animator's perspective, it's exactly that, Larry, what you said there. It's basically being able to look at it from a completely different side and try to serve bigger needs longer term is definitely it. So. Yeah.
Now, with the same team, you mentioned that you went over to Europe for a bit.
Yeah, that was really cool. Well, actually, I logged a ton of miles. I actually had a vacation before it, which was super awesome. So I flew down to like the Dominican Republic and then back to Vancouver and then over to Stockholm, Sweden. And the thing, like one thing that's totally not lost on me, like I've been doing this for like a pretty long time, but one thing that is never lost on me is that like there's places like, so basically we were at DICE for a week, and for those who don't know, DICE is the developer behind Battlefield 4 and 3 and Bad Company and several other great titles. But like I remember years back being like, dude, it would be awesome to go work at DICE. Like I would give anything to go work at DICE. You know what I mean? And I walked in the doors and I was like, wow, I'm at DICE. Like I'm, I can't believe I'm standing here. Like it's just nothing. Like I'm just here because I'm supposed to come here. And
That's
it's like,
cool.
no, I'm at DICE, and it was, the people there were super cool. And like as a developer community, that studio is pretty amazing. I mean, there's like a massive wealth of experience there. All the animators there were super cool, super hospitable. We went out and had a good time, and Stockholm itself is just a really incredible city. So yeah, that was super cool.
So now, what were you doing there?
Yeah, so the Frostbite engine was originally developed at DICE, and that's where it came from. It was basically born out of necessity to build a game like a Battlefield. So pretty much the lion's share of the super solid developer experience with the engine is there. So what they do is every year they basically host a conference for all the people developing with the engine to kind of meet up and share, and people that, because they're all over the world. There's studios in various number of places, and you just don't necessarily get a chance to go see all those people all the time. So they bring them kind of all together to share, workshop, essentially like if you go to a SIGGRAPH or something, and there's classes and workshops and breakouts and meetings and just general fun, which is also kind of good. But that's in essence what it is. It's just a way of pooling the knowledge base for a short period of time together to maybe see if people can pick up off each other.
I was going to say, because Brett has so much pull that we should probably get some free copies of Frostbite.
Actually, it's funny though. Like I was actually talking with Rick about this before, about maybe starting to plant the seeds of maybe some sort of presentation that we could do sometime, hopefully in the coming year, to expose a little bit of that stuff. And it seems like there's kind of an interest in that from the EA side. So we'll see what we get together. Yeah, it'd be really cool.
Yeah, you see, that's how we roll. But yeah, a lot of people, like when I first met Brett, I was really impressed. I mean, obviously he's super talented, super smart, and he has a lot to share. And one thing I want to know is, like, what are some of the things you like to teach, or you find students need to learn if they want to become successful and getting into the game industry?
Yeah, I talk a lot about one thing that I feel super strongly about is you almost, like, if you put it in terms of like a standard college, when you go to a college, you take a major and a minor, right? And in the atmosphere of the industry, back in the day, it was like you had to be a generalist at everything. And then things started to shift back towards where everybody had to be very narrowly focused on one discipline in order to add the kind of value that a team needed. And I don't know that it's come back completely the other way, but I just feel it's so important that people develop a secondary or tertiary or whatever skill set that supports what they do in animation. Because it's like, you don't want to spread yourself too thin, but you definitely want to be good at something and then kind of maybe not as good at something else, but to bring a focus into something else, like design. Is all for an animator. Design's a great place to get involved because it's so key to the utilization of the art that you create. So an understanding of design is massive. Maybe an understanding of scripting, an understanding of like some other form of art or engineering, or even just like marketing and salesmanship in yourself. Because excuse me, I feel really strongly that there's everything that you're doing is essentially a sales pitch in some way, shape, or form. And so the more comfortable you get with being able to sell an idea, whether it's to an animation director or to a department head or to a studio head or to God knows what else beyond that, it's important. So, and even just in the relationships that you develop with the people that you work with every day, you're kind of selling in a sense. And I think it's so important to just find, a couple of other things that you do really well, because that's really, to me, the key to like true success is just being somebody who can step up in another area when help's needed. So that to me is really big.
Yeah. Like I know this. I sounds like I'm going to repeat myself, but I always say it's really important to be valuable. And I want, and I tell this to everyone, our students or students I meet, invest in yourself. Don't just, like, it's great, and like, we love animation, we're it's an amazing job. It's an amazing form of expression, but it's really important. And I see there's a trend that our industry is evolving and things are changing a little bit. And I tell students they need to invest in themselves. Like, great, you become a really great at animation, but you should pick up rigging and motion capture. I mean, like motion capture is everywhere, and we talked about that in past podcasts. I mean, can you think of one movie that did not use motion capture part of the pipeline? So I'm like, these are things you want to pick up, and design. I thought it was a great comment. Like it's true when we model a character, or before even it gets to modeling, we want to make sure it's designed a certain way so it benefits us. And I wanted to get your thought on how important that was if you want to become successful, or you want to have some self growth.
Well,
Yeah, absolutely.
and kind of just like you mentioned with Cameron, that clip there that you mentioned that he used a little Mel, and I know even from Richard Lico's lecture that he did at the Pixel Challenge there, he brought in some of the kind of scripting, and it wasn't even that big. It was just kind of even making hotkeys from what he had done, and so it just seems like that if any way you can kind of help your skill set, that was the way to go.
Yeah, like you're either going to get really fast, or maybe someday someone's like, "Hey, we need someone to write some Mel script. Who does it?" Well, I can do it. And it's not to look at it in this light, but when decisions get made, I mean, I'm sure, a few of us have been in that situation where you're in the room when they're trying to make decisions about what they're going to do with people, whether they're moving people up, moving people out. Those are the kind of things that really make the big difference. But like, it's like exactly what Rick said. It's value added. You know what I mean? Like you want to be able to, you want to have more than one application. And it's funny because actually last night in the lecture that we were doing, one of the students from my block this time had mentioned, I asked him, I'm like, you seem like a pretty technical guy, and like, how did you get started in Mel? And he's like, well, I'm still not great at it, but I always go talk to engineers or scripters to come help me. And there's more, that's great to help and build that skill. But now you're like, it's not the general engineers, but sometimes they're not the most social people. Like I've definitely met ones that are, but animators are generally more social. And if you start reaching out to them and they're trying to help you with Mel, like, I worked with an engineer once who wanted to help us with our animation pipelines, and he learned Maya. And I was like, like I would do anything for that guy whenever he needed help, because I was like, this guy is trying to walk in our shoes a little bit. And I think more than just learning Mel, he's also trying to walk in some shoes. And when those people see that, they're impressed by that. They want to help you. You just start building. It's like you're building community, and that's so huge. Like when push comes to shove and somebody needs help and you're there to help, and you've already kind of extended, olive branches in these places, it's just so beneficial.
And you can solve problems. Like when I think and I see someone that has a lot of value, is someone I also look at they can solve problems. Like I can rely on, or I can like, hey, I need your help, or there's a problem, and they're the type of person I could solve it. Like regardless the challenge it is, they're the type of people that, because they're always looking to learn and build themselves. They're the type of people that say, I can solve this and I'm going to learn from it. So I like people that want, they don't need to be amazing at everything, just but it's good to have that extra skill set in something, or even two skill sets.
I think that's an awesome point.
All right, talking about the industry, what do you enjoy most about working in the games arena?
Well, just the diversity of the people that you work so closely with. Like, I've always had so much respect for really great film animators, but anybody that I've really known who worked in film seems to me to have had a more limited, span of people that they interact with on a regular basis, like on a daily basis, let's say. And I think that's probably the thing that I like the most about it is the, talking with engineers and just the quirky personalities that you get, like the range of people that you work with every day, from like crazy animators to like really, really focused and almost to the point of precious about art, kind of like character artists and concept artists, and then, scripters and riggers and producers and all these different people that you're interacting with on such a regular basis. That's the one thing I really dig. I really like the fast gratification. Like I love so much my favorite thing when animating in development is like when you're prototyping a feature. That to me is just so much fun. Like, your first pass of animations isn't top quality, but you're trying ideas and you're throwing them and you're trying them and you're testing them and you're tuning them and going back and forth between, art package, engine, tagging and time scaling and bringing it back, and just that iteration loop is awesome. And that's what started to get me more interested in a bit more of a technical side of things, was just that, because I had so much fun in that area. That's probably my favorite two things about development. But now I think it's the problem solving, because at this point I'm like, most of what I'm dealing with is problem solving, not just like pushing content into something, but like, hey, this doesn't work. How can we go around it? And the process of solving those things is a ton of fun.
What kind of games do you most enjoy working on?
Yeah, it's interesting because I've tried just about everything in development. Like we did combat, we did shooters, sports. They all had kind of a different element to them. Like, I would say like straight up probably combat, like a hand-to-hand combat game for me is probably the thing I would like to do the most. I just like the combo systems and counters and that toe-to-toe kind of. I'm more interested in kind of like maybe not like necessarily in an arena, but the idea of like an arena fight, like a shorter gameplay session with just lots of combat. But I was really surprised at how much I started to get into the RTS when we were working on the Company Heroes 2. Like just the strategy element of that was really appealing. And I can see why people lose so many hours of their lives to that. Like it's super, super addicting, right? So I understand why that happens. But yeah, definitely something with combat would probably be my first pick if I had the choice.
Okay. Now, what about starting a new generation of cycles for systems here? What are you looking forward most with this next gen?
Just straight up good gameplay. I mean, it's to me that's always kind of going to be the same thing, like that loop that makes something fun to play. You can skin it 100 different ways. You can skin it, with kind of stylized simple art or something really beautiful, like what you're seeing in like the battlefields now. And to me, it's just the same kind of core gameplay loops that I've always kind of dug, and it's more about like. I think from a technical perspective, I'm most excited to see is just the amount of stuff that's going to be moving now. Like when I remember I had a conversation with a couple people where it's like, what do you think? Like before everything was kind of really pushing out the door in terms of the Gen 4 stuff, was like, what's going to be the next thing? And I'm like, I guess just like a lot more bones. You know what I mean? Like more, take those bones and spend them wherever. And I feel like that the inevitability of moving more to vertex-based facial animation systems, like that's so close, like it feels like it's right there. So I want, a part of me just wants to see the graphical leaps, but the game player just wants to kind of the same experiences tightened up. I mean, I really love games like Naughty Dog games, straight up, like Last of Us to me is. I love games that just kind of like take, I guess the best way to describe it, like you remember that one scene in Last of Us where you enter that room and like the snare catches you and you're hanging from the ceiling while the zombies are coming at you, and it's basically the same like pop-up shooter level that you've seen a million times, but it's done in a more creative way. Like that you're hanging upside down and all of a sudden it's like a new experience. Like to me, I love stuff like that where you can take a simple design and just
make it new
with it. Make it new and make it creative.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like I love that stuff.
Right on.
Mm-hmm.
Extracurricular activities. You got any extracurricular activities you enjoy doing?
Yeah, I do.
Teach.
That was the first thing I was gonna say. No, I do. I actually, I know it sounds like maybe this was like a planned answer, but I really do enjoy the teaching stuff. Like I love like talking about animation. I like the connection that it provides me to it, and I really enjoy when I hear myself saying things, I'm like, I better keep doing that. You know what I mean? It's like, when you, it's almost like you're writing checks with your mouth, and now you got to cash them. You know what I
Someone's
mean?
gonna
So it's
call me on
great.
this,
Like,
huh?
exactly. Like, you got to lead, you got to follow the example, and you got to set an example, and do a good job in that regard. But like, aside from that, I got a wife and a son. My son's like, well, he's 9.5 now, which seems kind of crazy, but so I spend a ton of time when I'm not working, which is a lot of time, and then when I'm not teaching, me and my son, we go ski a little bit. Taking him to his stuff that he does, like his swimming. He's into violin, and these things I never would have thought he would be into, but he's
That's
into,
cool.
and I love going to see that stuff. And basketball, um, squash, like, active stuff is key, right? I mean, we sit for a really
All the time.
ridiculously long amount of time, and the more I can get out and run, and that's one of the really great things about EA is, like, the facilities are incredible. Like, today we played like floor hockey at lunch. Like, that's pretty incredible. Like, you could just do that at lunch and then just get back to work. So I want to move a lot. I want to make sure my joints don't become limited in their amount of rotation. So yeah,
To be able to relate to our animators, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rick, you got anything, bud?
I'm one. My oldest son is only 4, and like he hasn't
Yeah.
been exposed to any of the work I've done. But I'm wondering, what does your son think about your work, your animations? Like, what does he say when you show it?
Yeah, it's funny. There's this funny story. So we used to watch these things. They're called minuscule. They're like these crazy little
Oh yeah,
short
yeah,
animations with the bugs and stuff, right?
yeah. That stuff is
And it's like
awesome.
it's like live action plates shot with like these cool little animated bugs, like spiders and like flies, and they give them these personalities. Like, the flies are like these motorcycle gang dudes. So when they fly, it's like and like they sound like they're like a gang of motorcycle thugs or whatever. And then they've got these dragonflies that are like helicopters, and dung beetles, and spiders. Oh, they're so cool. Like, you can find them on YouTube. They're amazing. And when he was like, I think he was your son's age, Rick. He was like 4.5, going on 5, and I would watch him watch that stuff and just laugh, like hearty gut laughs when you watch that stuff. So I was like, you know what, man, I want to make something. I want to see if I could do a thing that would make him laugh. So I did this, like, it's not by any means like a visually stunning masterpiece, but I did this little flash sequence because I wanted to learn how to properly 2D animate and figure out some things like more on the traditional side. So I made this little film about a fish and a shark, and it's totally like that super physical, like, comedy, like a Three Stooges type of thing, that primal level of humor that would make kids laugh. Well, he laughed when he saw it, which was awesome. It was
That's
kind of like my
awesome.
birthday present for him. And he laughed, and I showed it again, and he laughed, and I was like, yeah, it was like by far the most satisfied I've been from making a thing. But yeah, it's funny because he doesn't play like a ton of games. Like, he's all over the Plants vs Zombies stuff. Like, he
Mm.
just can't put that stuff down. But
Yeah.
he hasn't really, you know, I'm trying to, like, keep it balanced. Like, not like, hey, my dad, works in games, so we play games like all the time. It's like we have our little battles in NHL, and we have our,
Nice.
we have we that's mostly where we battle, is like in like the sports games and stuff like that. Because I don't know,
Mhm.
man, the shooters and stuff, like, I want him to kind of like ease into some of that stuff. And
Yeah.
he sometimes, he sometimes comes in when I'm teaching, and he just like sits real quiet and like watches the screen. He kind of like hides from the camera and just like watches what's going on the screen. Or if you watched one of my lectures, he drops my toothbrush in the toilet. Um,
Oh, yeah, I
that was
remember.
hilarious, dude. It was so funny. He comes into my lesson and he's like, Dad. I'm like, oh, buddy, we're live here. Like, what's up? He's like, just wanted to tell you, accidentally dropped your toothbrush in the toilet. Awesome. Thanks, buddy. We'll talk about it after.
Hey, at least he told you before, right? Before you
Exactly, right? Yeah.
That's
You don't want
love.
to find that out the hard way. But yeah, he thinks it's cool, but it's like, yeah, it doesn't register. I don't think it's really registering to him like it's some kind of big violent thing, seeing these like creature kills and stuff like that. But he's pretty intrigued by it. Yeah, he
we got to
definitely
get
wants
the
to-
minuscule. We got to get the link to one
Okay.
of
In our show
the
notes.
flies and then the beetle one.
Oh,
So-
it's so funny, man. There's like one where the dung beetle's pushing his little ball. There's like the spider ones where they're
It's
dude,
good.
and it's all
I've seen
just
that, too.
physical stuff. Like there's one where like a ladybug is taunting the flies on the garbage can. He's like dan, 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 dan. He like flies off and they chase him and they go through this. The spider keeps trying to spin a web. Every time he gets it done, boom, they go through it. It's like, oh. Yeah,
It'll be our Christmas gift to the audience.
All right.
it's really good stuff. Really good stuff. Super.
Sweet.
Yeah, man.
Well, Brett, we do again appreciate your time joining us. This will probably be our final podcast for 2013, and so yeah, we really do appreciate being able to go out with a bang here.
No, it was a lot of fun, man. Happy holidays to everyone. If you get time off, enjoy it.
And then we'll
Thanks.
be seeing everyone next year.
That's right. Absolutely.
The new block, man. January is the new block.
All
You gotta
right.
get in there to get on this stuff. It's good.